A very good morning to all of you. It is indeed my proud privilege to be able to deliver this lecture under the aegis of the Bar Council of India. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Bar Council of India under the dynamic and far-sighted leadership of the chairman of the Bar Council of India, Mr. Manan Kumar Mishra, especially for having institutionalized this lecture series. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to deliver this lecture and to hopefully have an interactive session with the legal educators and lawyers and law students and others who may be connected with the broader legal community. I would also like to particularly congratulate the BCI, all its members and office bearers, including its leadership, in particular Mr. Mishra, for having spearheaded a very difficult time in the history of global legal education. The last 18 months since March 2020 has not been easy, but with a lot of collective consultation as well as engagement with legal educators, with law school vice chancellors and law university vice chancellors, as well as others, a number of challenges, including promoting greater understanding of what needs to be done. All of that was done during this time. So once again, kudos to the Bar Council of India. Let me begin by saying that I personally have had the privilege to study and obtain degrees in law from 4 leading law schools and universities of the world. The Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi, where I did my Bachelor of Laws, LLB. The Faculty of Law at the University of Oxford in the UK, where I obtained 1 Master's in Law as a Rhodes Scholar. Third, I obtained another Master's in Law at the Harvard Law School at Harvard University in the United States. And I obtained my Doctor of Juridical Sciences at the Faculty of Law, University of Hong Kong in Hong Kong, which in a way, it helped me to look at the broad legal systems and legal contours and legal education practices in different parts of the world. I have taught in a few law schools, but mostly spent my academic career at the School of Law of City University of Hong Kong. I have visited and delivered lectures and talks in over 100 law schools across India and over 200 law schools around the world. But I must say that the foundation of my legal education was very much in India at the University of Delhi. I was fortunate to have truly extraordinary and inspiring teachers such as Professor M.P. Singh, Professor B.B. Pandey, late Professor Parmanand Singh, and many other outstanding teachers and mentors at the law faculty. I was also deeply inspired by the work and contributions of Professor Upendra Baxi, Professor N.R. Madhava Menon, and many others in India and around the world. I've also had the privilege to interact and engage with some of the most inspiring legal educators and researchers in the legal profession, such as my very dear friend, Professor Jayant Krishnan from the Indiana University Maurer School of Law, Professor David Wilkins, who heads the Center on the Global Legal Profession at Harvard Law School, and many other individuals whose names I won't be able to mention. This lecture is about the future and not about the past. And it's important for me to mention this. It is not even so much about the present. So if you want to know more about the past, I will refer you to an absolutely fantastic article. In fact, I would consider this as one of the most authoritative articles written about a comprehensive tour de force on the past vis-a-vis Indian legal education. It's published in the American Journal of Legal History in the year 2004, written by my very dear friend, Professor Jayant Krishnan. The title of the article is Professor Kingsfield Goes to Delhi, American Academics, the Ford Foundation, and the Development of Legal Education. A very comprehensive article that simply covers the entire history and evolution of legal education in India. I strongly recommend that you read it. All right. Before I move and talk about the future, I want to quickly make a case as to why we need to think about the future of legal education, because it's always a tough thing to predict the future, and I don't intend to do that. But I'm going to give you a sort of a bird's eye view of what I think is going to be the future, and in that process, what we need to do, to prepare our law schools better. But before I do that, I have 5 points to make and I will try to make it as accessible for people who are watching this program. I believe a number of students are watching it. So this lecture is going to be less scholarly, but more useful for students and legal educators to understand as to what are the key issues that we need to be conscious of. The first reason why we need to think about the future of legal education is that we need to be conscious about strengthening our democratic institutions. A strong legal education foundation, which will help us to build the legal profession, is only going to strengthen our democratic institutions. And I do believe that all over the world, the democratic institutions that are prevailing in different countries are under threat, and it's important for us to strengthen them. Second reason why we need to be conscious about the future is that we need to promote a culture for the respect of the rule of law. And I say this because of the fact that there are enough instances that happen every day in our own society that shakes and even tests the foundations of the rule of law. And for us to build a culture for the respect for the rule of law, we need to invest in law schools and legal education so that the next generation of lawyers and judges and legal academics are more respectful, but also more sensitive about the need for developing a culture for the respect for the rule of law. Third, which I think is absolutely critical, is that we need to recognize the need for promoting access to justice. And who else is more suitable than lawyers and judges who are going to be going through the process of legal education? So we need to recognize that need for access to justice and help law transcend the barriers of transactions and elements that are important but not necessarily fundamental to the very idea of the rule of law and developing a justice system. Fourth, I think this is something which we have talked about a lot, is we need to take care of the future of legal education, because this is also an opportunity for us to protect the independence of judiciary. In fact, all over the world, and even in our own history, there have been enough occasions when the very foundations of independence of judiciary has been threatened. It becomes an absolute critical responsibility of the people who belong to the law, the field of law, including legal educators, law students, lawyers, and other judges, to be conscious of the institutional protection that the judiciary needs for developing all the other things that I talked about. And the last aspect, which is the fifth point, is about speaking truth to power and making power holders accountable. Legal education is absolutely essential for ensuring that we have the next generation of individuals who are going to be constantly, speaking truth to power and making power holders accountable. I was so pleased to see yesterday that two outstanding journalists were awarded the Nobel Prize, and both of them were awarded the Nobel Prize because they spoke truth to power. It has been recognized by no less than the Nobel Committee that this is something that needs to be celebrated, appreciated, a rare quality that is slowly, gradually disappearing from our society. It's important for us to make efforts to create that culture for respecting, independence, autonomy, and also seek transparency and accountability. So these are the 5 reasons why I think we need to care about the future of legal education. Let me now move into the substantive part of my lecture. Now, legal education, I believe, plays an important role in developing lawyers, social engineers, and work towards the cause of nation building. In a globalized world, law schools face the challenges of increased international competition and possibly the reduction in the role of the state itself. If you look at India, for example, at the dawn of Indian independence, there were nearly 20 universities, almost all of them, in fact, all of them are public universities. And today we have over 1,000 universities, and over 50% of them are largely in the private sector. At the same time, globalization affords space for reimagining higher education systems by affording opportunities for establishing global universities with international collaborations and programs, which has become part of the appetite and aspiration of young people across the world, including the developing world. So today I look forward to sharing some of the views of law schools in India and discuss about the reforms that are required to define the future of legal education in India in the light of globalization and indeed the ongoing pandemic. Globalization and the changing dimensions of the Indian economy and polity has resulted in new challenges for institutional governance. This has only further amplified by the changing dynamics in demands of justice triggered by the rather long and arduous struggles that all of us are going through due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Rule of law in all its dimensions remains the single most important challenge the countries are facing today, including India. The civil and criminal justice systems are under severe stress. But is it new? Is this a new phenomenon that we are seeing in India? Probably not. One of the greatest lawyers of the 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi, who was a lawyer for nearly 25 years before he became leader of the freedom movement in India. And he, of course, led the independence movement and contributed quite remarkably as a journalist in Young India, Navjivan, as well as the Harijan. But in South Africa, he led a civil disobedience movement to fight the racist laws on several occasions. And I would like to draw your attention to a fascinating book by the author Charles DeSalvo in his book entitled The Man Before the Mahatma, M.K. Gandhi, Attorney at Law in Morgantown. And De Silva has argued that it was the injustice of the South African legal system, the then South African legal system, that turned Gandhi away from the courts. And he writes, and I quote, Gandhi eventually lost faith in the traditional legal system, courts, judges, lawyers, litigation. But he never lost faith in the law, unquote. De Salvo says this about the extraordinary career of Gandhi in law. Now, I say this because of the fact that one of the things that we need to be conscious of is that we need to ensure that this faith in the Indian legal system, including the faith in the courts, the judges, the lawyers, and the litigation, is a fragile faith that we are having, and we need to protect it. And that is why legal education becomes important. The role of law schools in imparting legal education and developing lawyers who are traditionally rational thinkers and social engineers is central to the future of legal education and the development of a knowledge society. This can only be done if the law schools are able to attract some of the best and the brightest minds to make a lifelong commitment to teaching, learning, and researching so that they're able to inspire the next generations of students to work towards establishing a rule of law society in India, who could become a litigating lawyer, a corporate lawyer, a trade lawyer, an investment lawyer, an IP lawyer, a judge, but pretty much regardless of whichever aspect of the legal profession, they're committed to the idea of the rule of law. The need for raising academic standards, creating a better research ecosystem, developing sound infrastructure, formulating good governance models within law schools, creating better career opportunities, and promoting professional advancement of academics are all critical towards achieving this. Now, however, the need for promoting excellence in legal education in India ought to be predicated upon our responses to what I believe the following 10 pillars of success approach to redefine the future of Indian law schools. And I'm going to talk about each of those 10 pillars, the 10 critical aspects that every law school need to be conscious of as they build their future. First, the vision of a not-for-profit and philanthropic law schools. Now, why do we think about a not-for-profit and philanthropic law schools in the first place? Well, to begin with, there are significant cost centers associated with the law school. Having a world-class law school needs investment in multiple areas, recruitment of outstanding minds as faculty and staff, funding for research, support for research centers, creation of incubation centers, developing of physical infrastructure, use of technology, provision of holistic learning and student experiences on campus, and beyond, having opportunities for mooting and advocacy and experiential learning and clinical legal education, and of course, providing international opportunities. All of this requires significant financial resources, and we need to recognize that. An outcome of this problem is that we have ended up having exclusive dependence on the government. I am not for one saying that we cannot have governments to fund it. All I'm saying is public law schools have ended up becoming entirely dependent on the government for all its financial resources, and which has unfortunately contributed to limiting the capacity of funding that could be available for public law schools. And of course, there is a whole range of private law schools which are unfortunately dubious in nature, have very much undermined the vision of legal education with large investments made in a non-philanthropic models, which have contributed to the towards developing mediocrity in legal education. This needs to be addressed quite soon. And I must confess that this has also undermined the ability of good law schools, both in the public and private sector, to achieve its full growth and evolution. And of course, another consequence of this model is that there has been a leadership crisis, and that needs to be addressed quite urgently in Indian law schools to reflect upon the crisis of leadership and the inability to seek reforms relating to institution building for creating world-class legal education. So I believe the one big thing that we need to be doing in the future is to focus a lot more on not-for-profit philanthropic law schools in the private sector and significant infusion of resources through private philanthropy and corporate philanthropy into public law schools. This is the only way by which we can make the future of legal education Atmanirbhar. The Atmanirbhar law schools of the future need to become independent, autonomous, and financial autonomy will play way for other forms of autonomy it can have. Let me give a little more perspectives to this point, which I just mentioned. Now, we need to reassess and radically re-examine the funding framework. We need to imbibe from global law schools around the world and consider them as role models where world-class institutional capacities were being created in both public and private sector. You can look at, for example, the Oxford and Cambridge model, which are more on the public sector side. And you can also look at Harvard and Yale and Stanford and NYU and other such law schools in the US, which are more on the private side. But regardless of whether you look at the public or the private sector, one thing is very clear: our dependence on government funding for all aspects of legal education needs to be re-examined. We need to empower our law schools and not only depend upon government funding as the sole basis for creating excellence. We need to promote philanthropy, harness individual, institutional, and corporate philanthropy, and also recognize the role of corporate social responsibility to create a roadmap that incentivizes CSR funding. So that's on the first big thing, which is on the future, which is about expanding and recognizing the role of not-for-profit and philanthropic law schools. Let me move to the second thing, which I want to say, which is about academic freedom and institutional autonomy. Now, we all know that there are huge challenges for academic freedom and institutional autonomy. The first is the multi-stakeholder issue. Multiple organizations involved in shaping legal education in India and at various points of time need to be conscious of the fact that there are multiple stakeholders involved. Each of them has its own perspective on what ought to be the future of higher education, and multiple perspectives have been brought to bear from multiple stakeholders in shaping the future. Second, we need to recognize the need for promoting consensus, a balance between consensus building on the one hand and academic freedom and institutional autonomy, both internal and external. We need to recognize that the growth of law schools creates opportunities for limiting the possibility for institutionalizing academic freedom, creation of knowledge, and development of the legal education sector. This is a matter that should be discussed within law schools, and there is a very strong thinking that is emerging that law schools need to have more academic freedom and more autonomy within the larger framework of rules and regulations that are promoted by the regulatory authorities. Now, how do we promote it in the future? Now, one of the ways by which we can think about the future of academic freedom is that it should be examined in the light of globalization. Institutional autonomy ought to be maintained, but it should not conform to short-term indicators or metrics. There should be a strong emphasis on academic freedom, but balanced with transparency and accountability. In fact, I must compliment the Bar Council of India on this, that time and again, the chairman of the Bar Council has talked about the need for building quality into legal education. And he has also mentioned that there are a number of law schools that need to be, that should not have been established in the first place, but having established, they should be closed down because of the mediocrity that is embedded in these institutions. So addressing the criticality of accountability in the context of growing commercialization of education is something that we need to take on board, and enlightened law schools and law universities need to make it as a part of its institutional priority. Now, academic freedom is also a part of social responsibility, both the elements of education policy and the governance of law schools itself. Now, state has the role and responsibility in protecting academic freedom. It should not be limited to being discreet and exercising self-restraint in its possible interventions. Ideas need to be available for freely expressed by law academics, as academic freedom is a human right as well. It is a responsibility for academics to engage in the democratic process and exercise an empowering function that should be the goal of constitutionalism, which is deeply embedded in our political culture. We also need, independent democratic institutions within the academia, which are consciously working towards ensuring that academic freedom. And this is something which we as academics need to be conscious of when we are promoting the idea of excellence. I also think that there are a number of international initiatives that have been promoted over the years, starting with the 1940 Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure, jointly authored with the American Association of University Professors and the Association of American Colleges, now known as the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Some of the earliest initiatives on protecting academic freedom include the International Conference convened by UNESCO in 1950, and of course the first global colloquium of university presidents who met at Columbia University, where the main theme of discussion among the university presidents was academic freedom. In fact, the government of India has also created a very interesting model of what they have called, when it comes to creating regulatory autonomy, they have come up with the policy on graded autonomy. The idea of a graded autonomy is that and a set of incentives have been given to institutions that have achieved certain degree of success and evolution, and lesser levels of regulation have been imposed. Elsewhere, in my discussions with the Bar Council of India, I've often engaged with them, and the chairman and other members have been very positive about the idea that when you have 1,700 law schools in India, all of them need not be, same standards of assessment need not be used for them in that, and different forms of regulatory architecture can be built in to promote that. And they, Bar Council of India, can possibly look at what the government of India, the Ministry of Education, has done when it comes to giving the status of graded autonomy to select institutions in India, using the NAC accreditation and the points the university obtains in the NAC accreditation as the framework for granting graded autonomy. All right, let me move to the third aspect of it, which is about multidisciplinary legal education and interdisciplinary learning. Now, this is so important because We, of course, have now got nearly 3 decades of experience of the undergraduate integrated 5 year law school model and 5 year integrated legal education programs. And thankfully, we continue to foster the vision for promoting 3 year LLB program for those students who study another discipline or a related discipline in their undergrad studies and then end up coming into law after their undergrad degrees. And I have some views on it, which I will come back in a minute. Now, let me just say that why is this important? Well, to begin with, there are diverse perspectives to resolve complex problems. To navigate the complexities of life in the 21st century world, especially in the post pandemic world, law school students need to develop a deep interest in not only the substantive aspects of their profession, but also wider aspects of their future practice. Interdisciplinary problem solving enable youth with the ability to deal with problems that are by definition truly interdisciplinary. How to synthesize from a range of perspectives, reduce ambiguities without necessarily oversimplifying, and hold meaningful conversations. In fact, the key advantages of interdisciplinary legal education is the breadth and depth of knowledge acquisition, the diverse skill formulation, and the need for promoting employability across different sectors. Now, I do believe that interdisciplinarity does get interwoven into our 5 year program through the first 2 years of legal education, where history and political science and literature and sociology and economics and sometimes accounting and business studies and other things are being brought in, depending upon whether it is a BA honors LLB or the BBA honors LLB or BCom honors LLB. But one of the things that we need to be conscious of is that the growing trend among young law students across the country is their relative impatience towards subjects that are not law, and have unfortunately begun to believe that this study of these subjects are just a sideshow till they are actually end up studying law. I remember very famously late Soli Sorabji once in a chat had talked to me about the fact that for a law student, law is the last thing they should study. And I couldn't understand what he meant. And then he said, you should have studied history and sociology and political science and anthropology and literature and economics. And once you have studied all of this, or have got a good sense of this, then you should study law, because that will form the foundation for law itself. And I, after having been in legal academia for now nearly 2 decades, I can say that what he said meant had such a powerful and profound impact on my own career and also my own experiences. So we need to be mindful of the challenge of the 5 year law program, which in many ways premiums the idea of studying law more than the idea of studying liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. All right, I'm conscious of the time, so let me move to the fourth aspect of what I wanted to say, which is that the future law school should have a stronger and a more robust admissions process. Well, this is important because it needs to build a long-term credible institutional reputation. It needs to ensure that equity and access are prioritized and institutionalized. Now, transparency is a very important component, and I must say that the public institutions in India have done a much better job than private universities and private institutions, making comprehensive information related to programs, fees, application procedures, scholarship information available to students. It should have defined clear-cut criteria for these scholarship awards. It should encourage applications from meritorious students from diverse geographical and socioeconomic backgrounds, and also to promote admission system that are robust in nature. I'm very conscious of this aspect because ultimately, in a country like India, where there is a vast need for students to fulfill when it comes to their higher education aspirations, and the reality is there are, in their perception, and to a large extent is true as well, there are far fewer good law schools that one can aim to study, and the number of bright students out there who are aspiring to get into these schools are much, much larger. And it's important for us to create that sense of legitimacy and credibility in the process. The fifth aspect of what I wanted to say as the 10 pillars of success for the future of law schools is internationalization at the heart of legal institution building. In fact, when I went to law school in Delhi University in the year 94, 97, this aspect was not something that I thought much about. Although we quite interestingly had a few students who would come from other parts of the world, including from the United States and Europe and even Japan, who would visit for short terms. But I never thought the idea of opportunities for Indian students to actually go abroad. Now, this what used to be considered as simply not part of that imagination in the past, and what later became a luxury for a few students is now increasingly becoming a natural aspiration for a large number of Indian students. The knowledge exchange that allows streaming of knowledge from the developed to the developing world is now also dramatically changing, and we in India are contributing to that global knowledge transfer as well. We are also conscious of creating, and enabling dialogical interactions on new areas of research, pedagogical innovations, enhancements to student learning, advances in educational technology, and intercultural sensitization, which is not only for students, to faculty, but also for students. And that's why we need to promote internationalization. We need to also make our students sensitive to greater cross-national understanding that has been a powerful political and socio-cultural rationale for internationalization. In fact, it is very likely that the future lawyers in India and future law graduates are increasingly likely to work in global settings, moving across cities, either sometimes for long periods or short periods, but to be able to practice in a transnational legal ecosystem. And that means, in many ways, the transnational legal ecosystem is going to be a reality. And I do predict that it's going to, and unfortunately, our law schools today are not prepared for it. In every other sector, it has already happened. The manufacturing sector, for example, is a very good example. You go to even small towns in India, businesses thriving in those small towns, the business leaders, owners of manufacturing enterprises regularly travel to other parts of the world, including China, obtain materials from there, have business dealings either for purchase or sale or knowledge transfers. So almost every aspect of institutional and corporate life, this has happened. In other sectors, including banking and insurance and many other sectors, this is no longer a problem. But law is the last bastion which is resisting. But I do believe that from a student opportunity standpoint, this is going to change in the future. Now, in terms of student opportunities, let me say that the future law schools should take a lot more effort on building international collaborations for their students. It includes student exchange programs, dual degree programs, short-term study abroad programs, faculty exchange programs, joint teaching, joint research, joint publication, immersion programs in India for students to come from abroad, joint executive education programs, including lawyers training and capacity building programs, short-term study abroad programs. All these things are part of the international ecosystem and milieu that is going to define the future. So, what should law schools do for moving this in the future? First, they should focus on governance. They should carefully consider their policies for establishing global collaborations and activities that promote global interactions and provide for a global student and faculty mobility experience. Second, The law school should focus on policy evolution, need to evolve various policies that will guide them in establishing meaningful collaborations with institutions. They need to understand as to how credit transfers are possible, how students from different parts of the world can come to India and be in Indian law schools, how Indian students can spend periods of time in other parts of the world and actually get academic credit, which can be transferred back to their home universities, reflected in their transcripts, and end up being part of an international experience. They should build meaningful collaborations, innovate on programs that enable direct interaction between international faculty and Indian students, and a true collaboration that provides for a rich student experiences as opposed to collaborations and MOUs that remain only on paper with mere photo opportunities with no impact whatsoever on the student and life of a faculty. We also need to promote internationalization at home, internationalization of faculty members and students with Indian law schools. For this, law schools in India have to create an enabling environment that will create favorable conditions for the recruitment of faculty and students from around the world. Of course, we are very fortunate at Jindal. We have over 100 faculty members from 42 countries full-time who work and live in Sonipat. I must say that that's a luxury that we have been able to do it, and we're very fortunate that we're doing it. But I make it a point to ensure that these faculty members whom we have enough opportunities to interact and engage with other law schools in India, so that the students in other law schools have also benefited by the opportunity to interact and engage with some of the leading thinkers from around the world who happen to be working and studying in India as a part of our law school. Let me move to the sixth and probably one of the most important aspects that I want to spend some time here. This is about hiring of outstanding faculty as inspiring teachers and prolific researchers. Now, let me tell you this. This is a very pet theme for me, so I'm going to spend a little more time in this. I mean, since I moved to India in the year 2008, after having spent a decade abroad, one of the things that I have been doing is I've been giving talks across the country. I've given over 12,000 talks across India in schools and colleges and universities, and addressing young people, including in many national law schools and other law schools, private and public, and across India, literally from Nagaland to Kanyakumari. So now, one of the things that I do at the end of these talks, including in law schools and law faculties, is I ask the students whom I talk to, how many of them would like to become a teacher? How many of them would like to become a serious faculty member? And I have been very saddened to see that in almost every place I have asked this question in the country, including the most prestigious institutions whose names I won't mention, including every other institution, when I ask the question, mostly, one or two people will raise their hand in a group of 200-300 students. It's less than 1% of the students, if at all, are interested in being an academic. There are so many opportunities that today, law graduates have. And of course, I talk to students who have other aspirations, but confining this conversation to law, the reality is the best and the brightest of Indian young law graduates are unfortunately not interested in legal academia. And they are interested in doing everything else, including to become a lawyer, a litigator, work for corporate law firms, trade, investment, IP, want to work in think tanks, research institutions, international law firm, in-house counsel, in companies. They're ready to litigate in courts, in local courts, high court, Supreme Court as well. They want to do arbitration work. They pretty much want to do everything excepting law teaching. Now, I do believe that one of the biggest crises that we are facing in legal education now, and this crisis is going to exponentially increase in the next decade, is the significant institutionalized form of mediocrity that is going to get embedded in our law schools in a big way if we don't respond to it. The reason I predict this impending crisis as far as faculty members are concerned is that we have not been able to nurture. This is not a failure of any other institution. It is not the problem of the Bar Council. It is not the problem of the legal community, including lawyers and judges. It is an inherent problem of legal academia. All of us, as professors, as teachers, as researchers, have to accept that we have failed. We have failed to create an institutional culture that can create an aspiration among our young people to aspire to be a law academic. And so we need to do more. And the reason this becomes important is that we are increasingly moving into a situation where some of the best and the brightest of young people are wanting to come into law. A significant journey. I mean, 25 years ago, I remember when I went to law school, most of my relatives were shocked. They were completely surprised that they even said that I was a good student. What happened to me? The idea of entering into a law school was simply anathematic to a larger part of Indian narrative that bright students simply cannot make a choice to enter into legal education. But we have come a long way from that type of mediocre thinking. We have been able to generate extraordinary interest among young people to be wanting to study law, and they have begun to come into some of our leading law schools, and we have changed the dynamics in an unbelievable manner. In fact, parents are increasingly, becoming conscious of it. Another interesting trend that has happened, which I think is a very positive trend, is that when I went to law school in the year 1994, most of my classmates are people who had strong legal background. Their parents were lawyers, and their grandparents were judges, or they had very close family connections in the field of law. But not today. I'm happy to report to you that over 60% of our students are first generation lawyers. They have not had any family member whatsoever in law, and yet they are entering into the legal profession. This is because the legal profession has also become more democratic, more inclusive, and has created new opportunities for people who may not necessarily belong to some illustrious legal family. And the rise in the legal profession is not necessarily confined to only those people who ended up being part of those families. So in a way, the huge dichotomy that we are going to see is that some of the best and the brightest of Indian young people are coming into law schools to seek legal education. But I'm sad to report that some of the most mediocre individuals who probably did not get into legal profession, was not successful in corporate lawyering, or did not get any other job, or couldn't do anything better, unfortunately, are coming into legal academia. I am not generalizing. There are a lot of bright people out there whom I'm sure are pursuing legal academia as a choice, but a large number of law schools are facing this problem. So we need to recognize the need for recruiting outstanding faculty as inspiring teachers and prolific researchers. So why we need outstanding faculty? Well, building world-class law schools requires significant inputs that goes into the idea of creating a world-class institution. And that means that the need for recruiting good faculty is a recognition that the faculty is the most important and indeed the most significant factor in legal education. The teaching institutions focus largely on teaching only, and in many ways end up having disproportionately higher number of hours in teaching, which limits the possibility for faculty members to pursue research. We are losing talent to globalization because globalization has created new opportunities for Indian legal academics to be able to move around the world, and India is not the only choice. I've had many young people across the world who, even if they are choosing to be in academia, they would rather be working in a law school abroad than here. And this is the problem, and we need to address it. Now, how do we address this? Well, we need to focus on faculty diversity. We need to recognize the need for hiring both national and international faculty. We need to promote faculty retention incentivization program, recognizing that at the end of the day, these people who have chosen to be in academia have transcended their attraction and natural incentives to be in legal profession, so that they can make huge amount of money for themselves. the reality is, despite the most generous legal academic salaries that Jindal and other institutions offer, it does not match up to what my own friends in the legal profession would do. And that means legal academia is already weakly positioned when it comes to corporate law firms, when it comes to successful litigation practice, or for that matter, corporation, in-house counsel. So all those attractions that are out there simply don't exist here. So that means you're looking at truly motivated, inspiring, transformative leaders who are wanting to be in legal academia because they have an inherent purpose and a mission to contribute to the advancement of the next generation of legal professionals. We need to focus on faculty development program. We need to recognize that faculty members need to constantly reimagine their teaching pedagogy, their approaches to research. We need to create an environment conducive for people to research, and that faculty members are thinking individuals who are not only teaching and disseminating knowledge, but also they are developing critical thinking abilities with a view to analyzing existing law, existing judgments, and are helping in the evolution of law, reinterpretation of law, reimagination of law, and hopefully reform of the law itself. All right, let me move on. The seventh aspect is to build a culture of research and publications, something that has been written a lot about. I have myself written. We need to focus on the profound impact research has on society and beyond. It should be problem solving, responding to new problems for which old solutions and perspectives may not be helpful. The knowledge production and knowledge dissemination part needs to be integrated, and we need to have an informed and deeper understanding of the issues involved. We need to promote policy and innovation-based research, including impacting policy, produce innovation, providing solutions to social, economic, and political problems that affect India as a nation, which has a huge legal impact as well. Now, how do we promote research? Well, one of the things that we should do is to recruit and retain faculty members who have those thoughtful minds to not only teach well, but also write well. We need to motivate and inspire and incentivize our faculty members to focus on research and knowledge creation and producing scholarship and publications so that they can help in the reimagination of law. They can help in the reinterpretation of law. They can help in the reform of law. They can contribute to the change in law. And that is what research does. We also need to think about the reward systems, including faculty salaries and compensation. We need to think in terms of what kind of standardized system of faculty salaries may not have worked, regardless of the qualification, academic performance, academic standing, research work, and publication record need to be given same salaries because of the years of work experience, or for that matter, seniority. Seniority as a framework needs to be challenged. In fact, this aspect of we cannot make seniority as a handmaiden to the larger cost of improvement in quality, and we need to think about it. I'm not saying seniority does not have any value, but we need to use other metrics as well when we think in terms of rewarding faculty members. We need to balance scholarship and public policy commitment, including promoting research and scholarship in universities and encouraging faculty members to take research seriously with an equally important public policy commitment. We need to maintain the teaching and research balance through teaching faculty student ratio. In fact, the large Indian universities unfortunately have a very poor faculty student ratio, and good universities should aim to have a great faculty student ratio, which will create opportunities for faculty members to teach and also contribute to research. So in the future, we have to rethink about the one size fits all funding model. We need to inculcate a culture of research and knowledge creation. All right. The eighth aspect is we need to focus on institutionalization of accreditation, rankings, and benchmarking. No longer Indian institutions and Indian law schools can benchmark itself only among ourselves. We need to completely change that approach. The fact is that we are competing increasingly at the world level, and that means What happens in law schools in Singapore and Hong Kong and South Korea and Taipei matters, just as what happens in law schools in North America, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and a host of other countries do matter. So we need to focus on global standards of excellence, where India has a huge responsibility to contribute to the future. We need to focus on university performance and impact measures. Rankings give many new insights into the performance and contribution of universities at a global and regional level. We need to develop matrices which will measure quality and excellence, including all the critical dimensions of a law school. The need for having outstanding faculty members with qualifications and experiences, the need for looking at publications, including Scopus Index publications, looking at international collaborations in which student mobility is encouraged, having experiential learning opportunities in the form of clinical programs, having capstone projects for students to work within the community and in the industry, and to bring that experience back into the law school to promote mooting programs, advocacy programs, debating initiatives, to be able to develop research projects and research initiatives. All these things need to be measured. In fact, we need to provide leadership to the world when it comes to the future of legal education. In fact, I want to say that over 2,000 years ago, India did provide that for the world. And Oxford University, where I studied, is nearly 800 years old. Bologna is around 1,000 years old. Harvard and others are nearly 400 years old. But India had universities long before these institutions. Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi, Vikramshila, all these institutions were truly global universities. They had students and faculty from around the world. They focused on interdisciplinarity long before the world discovered the term. They had a strong emphasis on liberal arts and humanities and social sciences, deeply embedded, along with studies focused on sciences as well. We need to retrace that steps and to be able to provide that leadership that the world requires now. We need to embrace Indian international law schools ranking, including recognizing the fact that most of our law schools are performing in a very low manner in international rankings. We need to focus on to what extent these parameters of law schools, which require academic reputation, employer reputation, faculty-student ratio, research productivity, internationalization, and how we can benchmark and empower Indian law schools to match with their counterparts around the world. So the Indian law schools, I believe, as a way forward, should focus on building the following. First, it should build strong institutional mechanisms to enhance institutional reputation using research and collaborations. Second, it should encourage international exposure of faculty to academic conferences and other national and international research engagements. Third, it should be driving research agenda to promote co-authored research papers with international scholars and academics outside of their own institution. Four, it should improve citation index and Google search results to augment publications using simple techniques in use by leading and top-ranked universities around the world. It should, of course, fifth, it should, of course, have a high faculty-student ratio. Sixth, and I strongly promote this, that we need to focus on improving the 3-year LLB program to attract the best minds after their undergraduate degree program. We also need to have consulting and advisory projects using intellectual capital from government and private corporations. We need to focus on increasing internal research funding, and we need to focus on facilitating faculty publications for research grants from external agencies. We also need to expand the international student body by venturing into new geographies and underrepresented demographic regions. We need to further invest institutional efforts in building collaborations that have stronger focus on research. Indian democracy has so much to offer to the world. India has to acquire and assume a leadership role in higher education and legal education. All the ingredients of a global legal education is very much available in India. The fact that we are a vibrant democracy, the fact that we have 850 million people who are less than 35 years of age, and when young people are contributing to change in every sector, we in India can contribute to that leadership. Ninth aspect of what I want to say is that, which is a pillar of success, is promoting diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and community engagement. Varying identities, perspectives, experiences, backgrounds, ideas, approaches, and orientations shape our thinking. Our law school should be exactly that. It should reflect the microcosm of society. We need to take every effort to promote that range of perspectives, and while we also focused on improving human individual experiences of students within those spaces. All kinds of diversity need to be promoted, including race and ethnicity and gender and sexual orientation and socioeconomic status and caste and religion and all kinds of political beliefs and ideologies. Law schools, I believe, should provide leadership for the entire university when it comes to promoting diversity and inclusion. The way forward to achieve this is to promote an academic, learning, and residential environment that continuously and consciously promotes openness to differences in ideas and orientations. Disincentivize antagonistic responses to differences and variations is also important, as people need to be knowing that what they do in that process is not right. Disapproval when such things happen is equally important as much as approval and celebrations. Creating a broader scholarship base, strong endowment, and funding networks are also equally important, so that those students who simply can't afford to educate in institutions are able to provide them with the support, financially including. Build an environment of trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. And we need to promote an active and meaningful engagement and participation with the local community. The last point I want to say is that as the 10th pillar of success is that we need to develop active participation of all stakeholders for good governance. The key stakeholders include students, faculty, staff, parent, alumni, in addition to relevant government bodies and departments, institutional partners, collaborators, potential donors and partners, neighboring communities, and other stakeholders. In fact, students need to be taken more seriously as active stakeholders, increase student participation in decision making, while students also becoming more responsible that they are indeed participating in the decision making. Strengthen feedback and redressal mechanisms. We need to create more avenues for student voices to be expressed. We need to nurture active student-led initiatives in academic as well as cultural persuasions. We need to enable governance structure and generous financial support for the future. As I end, I want to say that if the law schools in India are to provide institutional leadership in the fields of teaching, research, and learning, it is necessary for them to rethink the nature of legal education. The system of legal education in India is facing significant challenges. While the national law schools have flourished over the years and have provided new opportunities to create institutions of excellence, there is still need to continuously assess and evaluate our law schools in the light of the expectations generated from our student community. As we look towards the future, we must acknowledge some of the key issues that legal education is facing, and I will summarize them. Maintaining good quality law schools that can produce good lawyers, judges, teachers, and legal professionals. Expediting the presence of good caliber law teachers who can motivate the students and impart good legal education. We need to recognize the role for clinical legal education, particularly when it comes to impact of law on social realities. We need to motivate students to choose various career paths within the legal profession, including to opt legal academia, and not confine their aspirations in a myopic manner to join a corporate law firm. Nothing wrong in it, but that should not be the only aspiration. We need to sustain good legal talent within India, which includes persuading lawyers who are practicing or working abroad to return to India to pursue similar work. Let me also quickly reflect on the COVID context for redefining the future. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in greater demand for justice, and these demands would continue to grow in the post-pandemic world. This will also redefine the future of legal education. It will result in new ways of operating law schools. A new normal in legal education will emerge. Advances required in law and legal education are legal curriculum and programs, pedagogical reforms, innovation and experiential learning, including avenues for digital interventions, need for transformation in the way we access legal education. From hybrid learning to AI enabled home proctored exams, there has been a tremendous evolution in the way we can make legal education more efficient. The time as this time has given us as an impetus to reform legal education. I want to end by identifying 5 future trends and challenges about which I have not talked and I don't intend to, but it's important to mention. Technology and education. This is going to be a game changer in the future. Second, justice delivery mechanisms in India are not only going to be courts, and that is something that is going to emerge in the future. Third, the blurring of professional boundaries. We know law and chartered accountancy, but there are many more professions. There is going to be a rapid blurring of professional boundaries, and we need to be conscious of it. Fourth, we need to have a better understanding of the globalization of legal profession. Five, we need to have a better sense of the role of regulation, certification, etc., including approvals in both legal education and legal profession. I want to thank the Bar Council of India for giving this opportunity to a number of young people to participate in this lecture events. I want to conclude by recalling the fact that people who were trained in law played an important role in India's freedom struggle and later made the most significant contribution to the governance process in the early years of nation building. While different disciplines of study equip people with different kinds of expertise that assist in governance, lawyers can and should understand the need for the protection of the rule of law and the assurance of access to justice and fairness due to the nature and content of legal education. The Indian freedom movement indeed involves some phenomenally talented lawyers whose contributions to the freedom struggle and the never-ending pursuit of achieving justice was truly remarkable. The important leaders who led India's freedom struggle were trained lawyers, including Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Rajendra Prasad, B.R. Ambedkar, and many other distinguished and committed persons. Therefore, to strengthen the position of Indian law schools, legal education in India should embrace within its fold the concept of nation building and have impact so that the lawyers we produce in India are considered as a force to reckon with and are perceived as leaders within a broader framework and vision to the contribution of building a new India, a new society. Thank you very much to Mr. Manan Kumar Mishra and indeed the Bar Council of India for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and reflections on one of the most important aspects, which is the future of legal education. Thank you. All right. I'm getting some questions already. Nishit Kumar Maheshwari has asked about pro bono services and need to be made mandatory. Well, it's a very good question, Mr. Maheshwari. I have one of the things that I have noticed, experience in US law firms is that they have created a pro bono culture where, a specific number of hours need to be devoted by lawyers, including corporate lawyers, for whom billable hours is the only basis for assessing their contribution. They are expected to devote certain number of hours in their legal practice for pro bono services. It has become part of a firm's mandate, and increasingly many young people are entering into firms finding more about how seriously they are committed to pro bono practice. I strongly believe, and this is an area where the Bar Council of India can play a very important role. Bar Council can, engage with the law firms and litigating lawyers and others that young law graduates are particularly need to be, mentored to contribute certain amount of time early on in the legal profession and to contribute towards pro bono work. Well, Subham Raj Singh is asking about proposed policy to transform legal education. Listen, uh, you know, I mean, it will be presumptuous for any individual to suggest that. And I think as academics, we write a lot about it. I have written a lot, and I'm sure many of my colleagues have written a lot about what are the various policy reforms to transform legal education. I know for sure that the Bar Council of India, which is the nodal organization that regulates legal education in India, is conscious of that, and we will have more opportunities to engage with the view to providing the policy level impetus that is needed to transform legal education. All right, I have a lot of comments from Satyanarayana Paruchuru, not a question, from DK Srivastava, from Sanjay Kumar Jain. There's a question from Jover Singh. They're all comments. Dr. Suraj Singh has also given comments, so I don't see any questions, but it's been very useful comments as well. I want to say one more thing, which I didn't emphasize a lot, is that this is the time for us to all to come together. I think and Bar Council has a very big role to play, because the Indian legal education is also very fragmented. In somewhat some sort of a pyramid happens to be the national law schools. There are some 26 of them. Some states have even 3 national law schools. So we are also in a very we have I would call it, we have awkwardly expanded. At one level, we don't have enough faculty members to even have existing schools, but we are also expanding. So, and a lot of policy level impetus is unfortunately focused on few institutions, while we have not been able to think collectively when it comes to building the capacity across the 1650 plus law schools. So I think it will be a very good opportunity for us to think in terms of how we can, and all of them, by the way, need not do the same thing. We can develop minimal standards of quality and excellence at one level, and then move towards multiple paradigms of excellence when it comes to measuring quality. And that is how institutions around the world have functioned. And the experiences of other parts of the world only reinforce that quality doesn't need to be uniform. It can have diversity in it, but all of them should maintain minimal standards when it comes to quality and excellence. There's another. Yeah, there are more and more comments by Satyanarayana Paruchuru and Advocate Kailash Parihar, Devadatta Prusti, and others who have been part of it, Sunil Kumar and Advocate Ashish Singh and Hardik Kumar Patel. I also want to mention that the possibility for Indian law schools and legal education to reform and reimagine is not only confined to the Indian needs and aspirations. The reality is, 50 countries in Africa and many parts of South and Southeast Asia are looking up to India. While in the fields of engineering and medicine and a whole range of sciences, our universities and educational systems have provided huge leadership and impetus. But unfortunately, in law, we have not. And this is an extraordinary opportunity that we have, which is that the big question that we have is not so much how do we only cater to the Indian imagination or Indian aspiration for improving the quality of legal education. We need to be thinking as global law schools. We need to be thinking as a global university system. We need to be thinking at how we can, in many ways, inspire and impact the next generation of lawyers across the developing world. Because the developing world in general is underserved when it comes to quality legal education and quality law schools. And the fact remains, only the privileged in this developing world can go to United States or UK or Australia to seek high quality education, because it is way too expensive. I mean, sometimes Many of my students think that we at Jindal are expensive, and I have been time and again asked about it. But let me assure you that we are something like 20 times cheaper than US universities, and maybe 15 times cheaper than British universities and European institutions. So if we are expensive, you can imagine what I'm talking about when it comes to US and UK. But the fact remains that access to high quality education should not be to the privilege of the few, and we need to also recognize that we have a role and responsibility for the developing world in general, and Africa and South Asia and many parts of Southeast Asia will be deeply appreciative if we are able to provide that leadership. I'm conscious of the fact that many people have been sitting through the lecture for an hour or more. So, whatever questions you have asked and you have shared your comments, I'm grateful to all those comments. All I can say is that this is a very special moment in India when we, in a post pandemic world, so much of reform is possible, so much of pre existing notions have been challenged, so much of opportunities have been created, and Indian law schools and Indian regulatory bodies, including the Bar Council of India, have a fantastic opportunity to bring us together to be part of a conversation where we can think in terms of how we can elevate and significantly enhance the quality of legal education in India, which in turn will impact the aspiration of students from India, but also from around the world. That, I believe, is going to be the future, because we in India have a responsibility to address the problems of the developing world more generally. And that means our law schools should also rise up to the occasion.
Record